The moment her lips touched his, the world shattered into silence. Carenza felt the Duke stiffen beneath her hands, felt the sharp intake of his breath against her mouth, felt the weight of 300 stares pressing against her spine like blades. The crystal goblet slipped from his fingers and crashed against the marble floor, wine spreading like blood across white stone. She had kissed him. She, a maid in borrowed livery, had just pressed her mouth to the lips of Theron Vale, Duke of Ashworth, in the center of the grand receiving hall, surrounded by every noble family of consequence in the realm. The orchestra's final note hung suspended in the air, then died. Carenza's heart slammed against her ribs with such violence, she thought it might break through. Her hands were still fisted in the lapels of his midnight blue coat, so knuckles white, trembling. She could taste the wine he had almost drunk. Almost. If she had been 3 seconds slower, if she had hesitated even a breath longer. She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. They were the color of winter frost, pale gray rimmed with something darker, and they stared at her with an intensity that made her knees threaten to buckle. Shock, yes. That was there in the slight widening of his pupils. But beneath it lurked something else. Something calculating, something almost intrigued. Around them, the silence cracked. Whispers erupted like wildfire through dry brush. Fans fluttered. Gasps echoed off vaulted ceilings painted with scenes of ancestral glory. Carenza heard fragments cutting through the roar in her ears. A servant! Did she just... The Duke. Utterly ruined. The faces blurred together. A jewel-encrusted matrons with mouths hanging open. Young lords with champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Debutantes clutching each other with barely concealed glee at the scandal unfolding before them. And at the front of the crowd, standing where the announcement had been about to be made, Lady Ismay Thornwood. She was exquisite in ivory silk and pearls, golden hair arranged in an elaborate crown of curls, every inch the picture of aristocratic perfection. She was also staring at Carenza with eyes that promised slow, thorough destruction. Behind Lady Ismay, an older woman in black bombazine and diamonds gripped the arm of her chair with clawed fingers. The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth, the Duke's grandmother. The woman who had arranged every detail of tonight's celebration, including the betrothal announcement that should have occurred 30 seconds ago. The announcement that Carenza had just obliterated with her lips. Carenza's voice came out as a ragged whisper. She released his lapels, suddenly aware of how improper her grip was, of how close they still stood, of how completely and irreversibly she had destroyed everything. I can explain. Can you? His voice was low, smooth, betraying nothing. But his hand caught her wrist before she could step back, holding her in place with a grip that was gentle but unyielding. Because I find myself extraordinarily curious, what explanation could possibly justify a chambermaid accosting me in front of the entire assembled nobility? Chambermaid. The word cut through her panic. He knew what she was. Of course he did. This was his household. He probably knew every servant by name and position, which meant he knew exactly how catastrophic this moment was for her. Dismissal would be a mercy. Prison was more likely. Execution was not outside the realm of possibility for someone who had just publicly assaulted a duke. But she could not tell him the truth. Not here. Not with hundreds of ears straining to catch every syllable. Not when the person who had poured the poison into his goblet might still be in this room, watching, waiting to see if their attempt had succeeded. Your Grace, Theron. His grandmother's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. Release that woman immediately, and explain yourself. The Duke did not release her. Instead, something calculated moved behind his gaze, a decision made in the space of a heartbeat. And then he smiled. It was a devastating smile, charming and sharp and utterly convincing, the smile of a man who had never in his life been caught off guard and did not intend to start now. "Forgive me, grandmother." His voice carried effortlessly, pitched for the crowd as much as for the dowager. "It seems my darling couldn't wait for our announcement." The silence somehow deepened. Carenza felt the blood drain from her face. Our announcement? His hand slid from her wrist to intertwine with her fingers, an intimate gesture that sent fresh gasps rippling through the assembly. "Ladies and gentlemen," the Duke continued, his tone warm with false affection, "may I present Miss Carenza Hale, my betrothed." The hall erupted. Carenza could not breathe. The noise crashed over her in waves, exclamations of shock, cries of disbelief, Lady Ismay's sharp intake of breath cutting through the chaos like glass. The Duke's fingers remained laced through hers, anchoring her in place, while her mind spun wildly, grasping for purchase and finding none. Betrothed. He had called her his betrothed. She was a maid, a servant who had been scrubbing floors in the East Wing 6 hours ago, and now the most powerful man in the realm had just announced their engagement to every family that mattered. "This is absurd." Lady Ismay stepped forward, her ivory skirt swishing against the marble. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled at her sides, betraying the fury she struggled to contain. "Your Grace, I was told tonight would mark our engagement. This woman was not part of our arrangement." "Arrangements change, Lady Ismay." The Duke's tone held a note of genuine regret, perfectly pitched. "I apologize for any confusion my grandmother's enthusiasm may have caused. She was unaware of my existing commitment to Miss Hale." "Existing commitment?" The Dowager Duchess rose from her chair, diamonds glittering with each sharp movement. She was smaller than Carenza had expected, barely reaching her grandson's shoulder, but presence radiated from her like heat from a forge. "Theron Vielle, I have overseen every aspect of your life for 27 years. If you had an existing commitment, I would know of it. Some matters are too precious to share, even with family." The Duke's hand tightened almost imperceptibly around Carenza's. A warning, a plea, she could not tell which. "Carenza and I wish to keep our courtship private until we were certain of our feelings." "Certain of your feelings for a chambermaid?" The word hung in the air like smoke. Several people in the crowd tittered nervously. Lady Ismay's lips curved into a thin, triumphant smile. Carenza felt heat flood her face. She should speak, should deny this madness, confess the truth, accept whatever punishment came. But the Duke's thumb traced a small circle against her palm, and she remembered. The poison. She had watched Lord Whitaker's footman pour it, had seen the crystalline liquid disappear into the Duke's wine while everyone else watched the orchestra, had known, with bone-deep certainty, that if she did not act immediately, Theron Vielle would be dead before the first announcement was completed. There had been no time to call out, no time to alert guards, no time to do anything but launch herself across the space between them and press her mouth to his, knocking the goblet from his hand in the process. If she revealed the assassination attempt now, chaos would ensue. The culprit would slip away in the confusion, and she would be interrogated, doubted, possibly even blamed. Servants made convenient scapegoats. But if she played along with this insane charade, Miss Hale comes from a respectable family that fell on difficult circumstances. The Duke was still speaking, weaving a story out of nothing with the ease of a master. She entered service to support her widowed mother. Our connection began when she was assigned to organize my private library. Her intelligence and spirit captured my attention immediately. It was a lie, a beautiful, elaborate lie. Carenza had never been near his private library. She worked in the East Wing, changing linens and emptying chamber pots, invisible to everyone who mattered. But no one contradicted him. How could they? He was the Duke. "This is most irregular." The Dowager's eyes, the same frost-colored shade as her grandson's, fixed on Carenza with piercing intensity. "I require a private word with this young woman. Immediately." "Grandmother, now, Theron." For a heartbeat, something flickered between them. A battle of wills fought in silence. Then the Duke inclined his head, a gesture of acquiescence that Carenza suspected was more strategic than genuine. Of course, but Miss Hale has had a rather overwhelming evening. Perhaps she might have a moment to compose herself first. She may compose herself in my sitting room. Lady Ismay, Lord and Lady Thornwood, please accept my sincere apologies for this evening's irregularities. We will speak tomorrow. The dismissal was absolute. Lady Ismay's face contorted with barely suppressed rage, but she had no choice but to curtsy and withdraw, her parents flanking her like sentinels. As she passed Carenza, she leaned close enough that her whisper reached only its intended target. I know what you are, girl, and when this farce collapses, I will be there to watch you fall. Carenza did not flinch. She met Lady Ismay's glacial blue gaze and held it until the other woman looked away. It was a small victory. It would not last. The crowd began to disperse under the dowager's commanding glare, murmuring amongst themselves as they drifted toward the doors. Within minutes, the grand receiving hall had emptied of all but essential staff, who moved quickly to clean the shattered goblet and spilled wine. The wine that should have been in the Duke's stomach right now, stopping his heart. Miss Hale, the dowager's voice snapped Carenza back to the present. Come with me. I'll accompany, the Duke began. You will not. You will remain here and contemplate how spectacularly you have managed to humiliate this family. The dowager gestured sharply toward a side corridor. Miss Hale, now. There was no refusing. Carenza released the Duke's hand, feeling suddenly unmoored, and followed the dowager's retreating figure. She glanced back only once. Theron Vielle stood alone in the center of the empty hall, surrounded by the remnants of his grandmother's ruined celebration. He was watching her go, and his expression held something she had not expected. Not anger, not calculation. Concern. The dowager's sitting room door closed behind them with a sound like a tomb sealing shut, and Carenza knew, with absolute certainty, that the next few minutes would determine whether she lived or died. The dowager did not sit. She stood by the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, firelight casting harsh shadows across features that had once been beautiful and were now simply formidable. Silence stretched between them like a blade being slowly drawn. Carenza waited. There was nothing else to do. Close the door behind you. She had. But she checked again anyway, buying herself precious seconds to steady her breathing. The click of the latch seemed impossibly loud. Now! The dowager turned, and her eyes were glacier cold. No, you will tell me the truth. All of it. And if I detect so much as a whisper of deception, I will have you thrown into the cells beneath this estate, where no one will hear you scream. It was not an idle threat. Carenza could see that clearly in the steel of the older woman's spine, the absolute authority in her bearing. This was a woman who had buried a husband, raised a duke, and navigated the treacherous waters of aristocratic politics for 5 decades. She did not bluff. Your Grace. Carenza's voice came out steadier than she felt. May I ask a question first? You may not. It concerns your grandson's life. The dowager's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, Carenza thought she had miscalculated fatally. Then, slowly, the older woman inclined her head. Speak. When his wine goblet shattered, where were your eyes? On me, or on the floor? On you, obviously. The entire hall was watching your display. Then you didn't see the color of the wine? A flicker of uncertainty crossed the dowager's expression. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, Your Grace, that the wine your grandson was about to drink had been poisoned. I watched Lord Whitaker's footman pour something into the goblet while everyone was focused on the orchestra's final piece. I was standing near the servants' entrance. I saw everything, and I had approximately 4 seconds to prevent the Duke from drinking. Carenza paused, letting the words settle. Kissing him was the only way I could think of to knock the cup from his hand, without creating the kind of commotion that would allow the poisoner to escape. The firelight crackled. The dowager's hand tightened on the mantel. You expect me to believe that a chambermaid spotted an assassination attempt that my personal guard missed? I expect you to verify my claim, Your Grace. The wine that spilled is being cleaned from the floor as we speak. Have it collected and tested. If I'm wrong, throw me in your cells. If you're right, my grandson nearly died tonight, and you saved his life. Yes. The dowager studied her for a long moment. Then she moved to the door, opened it a crack, and murmured instructions to someone waiting in the corridor. When she turned back, her expression had transformed. Not warmer, precisely, but less murderous. Lord Whitaker's household has been agitating against my grandson's land reforms for months. The words came slowly, as if being pulled from somewhere deep. His footmen would have access to the family's resources, their contacts. It's not implausible. No, Your Grace. Why didn't you simply call out? Alert the guards? I was 20 feet away, Your Grace. By the time anyone reacted to my words, he would have drunk. The poison would have been in his blood. Carenza met the older woman's gaze directly. Sometimes the proper course of action is not the effective one. Something that might have been approval flickered in the dowager's eyes. Or perhaps Carenza was imagining it. You understand, of course, that this complicates matters significantly. Because your grandson has publicly declared me his betrothed. Because my grandson has publicly declared a chambermaid his betrothed on the night he was supposed to formalize his engagement to Lady Ismay Thornwood, whose family controls the northern shipping routes and whose alliance we desperately need. The dowager's voice was acidic. Whatever his reasons for this theatrical declaration, he has placed this family in an impossible position. I didn't ask him to. No, you merely assaulted him in front of 300 witnesses and left him to improvise. The door opened before Carenza could respond. The Duke himself entered, closing it firmly behind him, his expression unreadable. Grandmother. Miss Hale. He inclined his head to each. I see you've been getting acquainted. She claims you were poisoned. The dowager's voice was flat. Yes, I heard. I've had the spilled wine collected for analysis, and Lord Whitaker's footman detained for questioning. The Duke moved to stand by the window, his silhouette sharp against the night beyond. It seems I owe Miss Hale my life. You owe her a debt, the dowager corrected. That does not require offering her a dukedom. No, but it does change the calculus. He turned to face them both, and Carenza saw for the first time the full weight of his attention directed at her. Not as a servant, invisible and insignificant, as an equal, as someone who mattered. It was disorienting. Miss Hale, I'll be direct. Someone in my household attempted to murder me tonight. Until I know who ordered it and why, I cannot trust anyone. Anyone except, it seems, the chambermaid, who risked everything to save me. Your Grace, You saw something no one else saw. You acted when no one else would. You made an impossible decision in an impossible moment. His voice softened slightly. Do not minimize that. Carenza fell silent. Well, Lady Ismay's family may be behind the attempt, or they may not. But the Thornwood alliance has always felt wrong to me. Their enthusiasm, their pressure, their insistence on this specific timeline. He began to pace, long strides eating the distance between fireplace and window. I've been looking for an excuse to delay. You've provided one. By becoming your fake betrothed. By becoming someone I can trust in public while I investigate in private. He stopped pacing and faced her fully. I'm proposing an arrangement, Miss Hale. You continue to play the role of my intended. In return, I will ensure your safety, provide for your family, and when this matter is resolved, give you a future beyond anything service could offer. And if I refuse, then I will express my profound gratitude, provide you with an excellent reference, and pray that whoever tried to kill me tonight doesn't decide you're a loose end worth eliminating. The words landed like stones. Carenza's mother was struggling alone since her father's death, 2 winters past. Her younger brother, Corvin, still needed apprenticeship fees they could never afford. She had entered service because there were no other options, and she had expected to spend her life in invisible labor until her body gave out. Now a duke was offering her safety, purpose, a way out, and all she had to do was pretend to love him. 2 conditions, she heard herself say. His eyebrow rose. The dowager made a strangled sound that might have been a laugh. You're negotiating with me. I'm protecting myself, Your Grace. If we're to be partners in this deception, I need assurances. For a moment, something like respect crossed his features. Name them. First, my family must be told I've taken a position as a lady's companion, a believable cover. They cannot know the truth of this arrangement, or the danger will extend to them. Done. Second, when this ends, I need letters of reference that will allow me to secure a position. A real position, with a respectable family. Not a return to scrubbing floors. You'll have more than letters. You'll have my personal endorsement. Carenza hesitated on the edge of her final demand. It was bold, perhaps too bold, but something in his eyes told her he would respect boldness more than timidity. Third, if you discover during this investigation that marriage serves your purposes better than deception, you tell me immediately. I will not be used as a shield while you court someone else in secret. I may be playing a role, Your Grace, but I am not a fool. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Then the Duke extended his hand. You have my word, Miss Hale. All 3 conditions. Do we have an arrangement? She looked at his hand. Elegant, strong, attached to a man who was either her salvation or her destruction. Then she looked at the dowager, whose expression had moved from hostility to something more complicated. Finally, she thought of the poison, of the split-second decision that had brought her here, of the life she'd been living and the life being offered. She took his hand. We have an arrangement. His grip was warm and firm, and something electric passed between them. A seal on a bargain that would change everything. She just didn't know yet how much. The door burst open, and a young woman swept in with the energy of a summer storm. Dark hair cascaded over her shoulders. Bright hazel eyes sparkled with undisguised delight, and she was already talking before anyone could stop her. Theron, you absolute genius. I've been trying to get you out of that dreadful Thornwood arrangement for months, and you managed it with a single kiss. She caught sight of Carenza and gasped with theatrical pleasure. Oh, you must be her, the one who caused Lady Ismay's face to turn that extraordinary shade of purple. I'm Lucienne, his sister, and I think I might already adore you. The Duke pinched the bridge of his nose. Lucienne, perhaps some restraint. Restraint is for people who didn't just witness the most exciting thing to happen in this family, since Great Aunt Matilda ran off with the stable master. Lucienne seized Carenza's hands and squeezed. Please say you'll stay. Please say this isn't some dreadful misunderstanding. This is going to be magnificent. Carenza looked between the enthusiastic young woman, the calculating Duke, and the grimly watchful dowager. Magnificent was not the word she would have chosen. Terrifying seemed more accurate. Miss Hale will require lodging in the family wing, the Duke said, apparently accepting that his sister could not be contained. The blue suite, and a lady's maid, someone discreet. My maid, Tansy, can be trusted, Carenza offered, before she could stop herself. She served in this household for 3 years. She won't ask questions. Tansy, the dowager repeated, testing the name. The red-haired girl from the East Wing, competent, reserved. Yes, she'll do. Then it's settled. Lucienne was practically bouncing. Oh, grandmother, don't look like that. This is going to be wonderful. I can feel it. The dowager's expression suggested she felt something quite different. My grandson will see you to your rooms, she said flatly. We will speak again tomorrow, Miss Hale, at length." It was a dismissal and a threat wrapped in silk. Carenza curtsied and followed the Duke from the room, Lucienne chattering happily at her elbow. Behind them, the Dowager's gaze followed like a knife waiting to fall. Tomorrow, she would face whatever came next. Tonight, she simply had to survive. The blue suite was larger than the entire cottage Carenza had grown up in. She stood in the center of the bedroom, turning slowly, trying to absorb the impossibility of her surroundings. Walls covered in silk, the color of a summer sky. A four-poster bed, draped in velvet so deep it looked like liquid midnight. Crystal lamps casting warm light across Persian carpets that probably cost more than her family would earn in a lifetime. Through an archway, she glimpsed a sitting room with its own fireplace, already crackling with warmth. Beyond that, a dressing room lined with empty wardrobes waiting to be filled. A private bathing chamber with a copper tub large enough to swim in. 6 hours ago, she had been emptying chamber pots. Now she was standing in rooms meant for duchesses. "The staff will bring your belongings from the servants' quarters." Theron's voice came from the doorway, where he lingered rather than entering. Propriety, even now. "Though I suspect you'll need an entirely new wardrobe. Lucienne has already volunteered to oversee the process. I apologize in advance." "I heard that." Lucienne's voice echoed from somewhere down the corridor. Something that might have been a smile flickered across the Duke's face. It softened the sharp lines of his features, made him look younger than his years. Then it was gone, replaced by the careful neutrality Carenza was beginning to recognize as his default. "Breakfast is at 8. My grandmother will want to speak with you again, but I'll ensure you're not ambushed alone." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words. "Miss Hale." "Carenza, what you did tonight was extraordinarily brave. Most people would have frozen, or screamed, or done nothing at all. Most people weren't watching when the poison was poured." "No, but being in the right place means nothing without the courage to act." His winter gaze held hers. "Whatever happens next, I won't forget that." He was gone before she could respond, footsteps fading down the marble corridor. Carenza sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The mattress yielded beneath her like a cloud, so different from the thin straw pallet in her servant's dormitory that she almost laughed. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss, it's Tansy." The familiar voice unlocked something in Carenza's chest. She crossed to the door and opened it to find her friend, standing in the corridor, red hair escaping from her cap, some freckled face pale with shock. Saints above, Carenza. Tansy slipped inside and closed the door behind her. "The whole household is talking. They're saying you kissed the Duke in front of everyone, that you're his secret betrothed." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What in the seven hells happened?" Carenza pulled her toward the sitting room, checking that no other ears lurked in the shadows. "It's complicated." "Complicated? You were scrubbing the East Wing baseboards this morning. Now you're installed in the Blue Suite with orders that I'm to serve as your personal maid?" Tansy's eyes were wide. "Did you really kiss him?" "Yes." "Why?" Carenza hesitated. How much could she reveal? Tansy was trustworthy, had been her closest friend since they'd both entered service 3 years ago. But the truth was dangerous. The more people who knew about the poison, the more people were at risk. "I can't tell you everything," she said finally. "Not yet. But I need you to trust me, Tansy. What's happening isn't what it looks like, but it's real enough that I need you by my side. Can you do that? Can you help me without asking questions I can't answer?" Tansy studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "You've never lied to me, Carenza. Not once in 3 years. If you say trust you, I trust you." She straightened, assuming a more formal posture. "What do you need, miss?" The title sounded strange coming from Tansy's lips. Wrong. But Carenza understood its necessity. "Tonight. I need sleep. Tomorrow. She glanced around the magnificent room that was now supposedly hers. Tomorrow. Well, I need to learn how to be someone I'm not. You're still you, Tansy said quietly. Fancy rooms don't change that. But as Carenza prepared for bed in a silk nightgown that had appeared in the dressing room as if by magic, she wasn't sure Tansy was right. The girl who had grown up hungry, who had learned to make herself invisible, who had expected nothing more from life than survival. Could that girl really become someone who belonged in the blue suite? She lay in the impossibly soft bed, staring at the canopy above, and wondered what her mother would think if she could see her now. Would she be proud? Terrified? Both? Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of poison and frost-colored eyes, and the weight of 300 stairs pressing against her spine. Morning arrived with soft light filtering through silk curtains and the quiet efficiency of a household that had been preparing for aristocratic guests for generations. Tansy helped her dress in a borrowed gown of soft sage green that fit surprisingly well. Someone had taken measurements from Carenza's servant uniform during the night and made alterations. The speed of it was unsettling. Lady Lucienne sent it, Tansy explained, fastening the row of tiny buttons down Carenza's back. Said you couldn't possibly appear at breakfast in your old things. She's already ordered a full wardrobe from some fancy modiste in the city. 6 morning dresses, 4 afternoon gowns, 3 ball gowns, and more underthings than I've seen in my entire life. That's too much. That's what duchesses wear, apparently. Tansy met her eyes in the mirror. You look beautiful, miss. Like you belong here. Carenza didn't feel like she belonged. She felt like a fraud in silk wrapping, one wrong word away from exposure. Breakfast was served in a sunny morning room overlooking gardens that stretched toward distant hills. Lucienne was already there, attacking a plate of pastries with enthusiasm, chattering about dress fittings and social calendars. The Duke sat at the head of the table, reading correspondence with a small furrow between his brows. He looked up when Carenza entered, and approval briefly warmed his expression. Miss Hale, I trust you slept well. The accommodations were more than comfortable, Your Grace. Theron, please. If we're to be convincing, we should practice informality in private. His name felt strange on her tongue, too intimate, but she nodded. The Dowager was conspicuously absent. Grandmother breakfasts in her rooms, Lucienne supplied, reading Carenza's glance toward the empty chair. She'll summon you around 10. Don't worry, her bark is worse than her bite. Her bark is considerable, the Duke murmured without looking up from his letters. She likes people who stand up to her. Just don't show fear. Carenza thought of the Dowager's glacier eyes, the absolute authority in her bearing, the promise to have her thrown in cells where no one would hear her scream. Don't show fear. Easier said than done. At precisely 10 o'clock, a footman appeared to escort Carenza to the Dowager's private apartments. These occupied the entire east tower of Ashworth Hall, a suite of rooms decorated in the stark elegance of the previous century. Dark wood, heavy velvet, from portraits of stern ancestors watching from every wall. The Dowager sat in a high-back chair by the window, morning light falling across her like judgment. She did not rise when Carenza entered. Sit. Carenza sat in the indicated chair, keeping her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap. Every deportment lesson her mother had scraped together money to provide suddenly seemed inadequate. The wine has been tested. The Dowager's voice was flat. You were correct. A concentrated extract of monkshood, enough to stop a healthy man's heart within minutes. Relief and horror mingled in Carenza's chest. And the footman? Being questioned, he claims he was paid by an intermediary. We're tracing the connection. The Dowager's eyes fixed on her with unsettling intensity. It seems I owe you my grandson's life. I did what anyone would have done, Your Grace. Don't be modest. It doesn't suit you. The older woman leaned forward slightly. Anyone else would have done nothing, would have been too shocked, too slow, too bound by propriety to act. You saw a threat and eliminated it through the only means available. By kissing your grandson. By saving your duke. Something flickered in those eyes that matched her grandson's, so exactly. Whether you intended it or not, Miss Hale, you have bound yourself to this family. The question now is what we do with you. Carenza waited, sensing that silence was safer than words. My grandson believes you can be useful. A trusted ally in a household where trust is suddenly in short supply. The dowager's lips thinned. I am less optimistic, and you are a servant girl with no training in society, no knowledge of politics, no understanding of the forces arrayed against this family. Then teach me. The words came out before Carenza could stop them. The dowager's eyebrow rose. I beg your pardon. You said I lack training, knowledge, understanding. Those are things that can be acquired. Carenza met the older woman's gaze directly. Your Grace, I did not ask for this situation. I did not scheme my way into your grandson's attention. I saw a man about to be murdered and I stopped it. Everything that followed has been his choice, not mine. And yet here you are, in the blue suite, wearing borrowed silk. Here I am. And I can either be a liability you resent, or an asset you create. Carenza's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. I learned quickly. I work hard. I have spent 3 years in this household watching and listening and understanding how power moves through these halls. I may not know which fork to use at a state dinner, but I know which servants gossip, which footmen drink, which maids can be bribed. The dowager studied her for a long moment. You're suggesting you could be useful as more than a pretty distraction. I'm suggesting that the people who tried to kill your grandson don't see servants. We're invisible to them. Furniture that happens to breathe. Carenza leaned forward slightly. I can move through spaces they would never think to guard. Hear conversations they assume are private. If you want to find out who ordered that poison, I can help. Silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then the dowager laughed. It was a sharp, surprised sound, rusty with disuse. Theron said you were bold. I thought he was being sentimental. She stood abruptly, moving to a side table where a tea service waited. My grandson's mother was like you. Not in birth, she was a viscount's daughter, perfectly appropriate. But in spirit. She saw what needed doing and did it. Propriety be damned. Your grandson mentioned her. Did he? The dowager poured 2 cups without asking if Carenza wanted tea. She died bringing Lucienne into the world. My son never recovered. He followed her within 5 years, broken by grief. She handed Carenza a cup, their fingers briefly touching. Love is a weakness, Miss Hale. It destroys the men in this family. Perhaps that depends on who they love. The dowager's eyes sharpened. What do you mean by that? Nothing, Your Grace. Only that weakness and strength often look similar from a distance. Another long pause. Then the dowager returned to her chair, moving with the careful grace of someone whose joints ached, but whose pride refused to acknowledge it. You will need instruction, deportment, conversation, dancing. The modiste will handle your wardrobe, but clothes are merely the costume. You must learn to inhabit the role. She sipped her tea. I will oversee your education personally. Carenza nearly choked on her own tea. Your Grace, if you are to represent this family, you will represent it correctly. I'll not have some half-trained chambermaid embarrassing my grandson at court functions. The dowager's expression was severe, but something beneath it had shifted. Your first lesson begins this afternoon. Don't be late. It was a dismissal. Carenza rose, curtsied, and moved toward the door. Miss Hale, she turned. My grandson is the only family I have left that matters. Lucienne is dear to me, but Theron carries the weight of everything we are. The dowager's voice dropped to something almost vulnerable. If you betray him, if you hurt him, If you prove to be anything less than what you claim, I will destroy you so thoroughly that your own mother won't recognize your name." The words were ice and iron combined. "I understand, Your Grace. I don't think you do. Not yet." The Dowager turned back to the window. "But you will." Carenza left the tower with her heart pounding and her mind racing. She had won something in that room, some grudging acceptance, some space to prove herself. But she had also seen something else in the Dowager's eyes when she spoke of her grandson. Fear. Not of Carenza, of something else, something larger. Whatever forces had sent that poison, they were more powerful than a single footman's betrayal. And the Dowager knew it. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of instruction and exhaustion. Carenza's days began before dawn with deportment lessons in the long gallery, walking with books balanced on her head while the Dowager critiqued every step. Shoulders back, chin level. You're a duke's intended, not a scullery maid. Move like you own the ground beneath you. Mornings were devoted to conversation and etiquette, which topics were appropriate for which gatherings, how to deflect intrusive questions without giving offense. The subtle art of saying nothing while appearing to say everything. Afternoons brought dancing instruction with Monsieur Beaumont, a terrifying Frenchman with silver hair and the temperament of an irritated cat. "No, no, no. The waltz is seduction, mademoiselle, not wrestling. You must float, not stomp." Evenings were for reading, history of the noble families, memorizing connections and alliances and ancient feuds, political treatises the Duke recommended, poetry that Lucienne insisted was essential for any proper lady. Through it all, Carenza watched and learned, and slowly, impossibly, began to transform. Her posture changed first. The habit of making herself small, invisible, servant-shaped, gave way to something straighter, more present. She learned to take up space instead of vacating it. Her voice adapted too. Not the words she used, but the way she wielded them. She learned to pause before speaking, to let silences work in her favor, so to pitch her tone for different audiences. "You're becoming someone else," Tansy observed one evening, helping her undress after a particularly grueling day. "Not bad different, just different. I'm becoming what they need me to be. Are you sure that's all?" Carenza didn't answer. The Duke remained largely absent during her transformation. Estate business, he claimed, parliamentary matters, private investigations into the assassination attempt. But she caught glimpses of him, passing in corridors, seated at the far end of the breakfast table, attention fixed on correspondence. Standing at a window, silhouette sharp against the fading light, watching something she couldn't see. Each glimpse unsettled her in ways she refused to examine. On the 15th day, he summoned her to his study. The room was smaller than she expected, so lined with books and papers, a desk covered in correspondence and ledgers. Maps hung on the walls, marked with notations in a cramped hand. This was not a space for show. It was a space for work. "Miss Hale." He rose as she entered, a courtesy she still wasn't accustomed to receiving. "Please, sit. We need to discuss the Meridian Ball." "The what?" "Lady Castellan's annual gathering, 3 days from now. It will be your first public appearance since the announcement." Since she had kissed him and changed everything. "Your grandmother believes I'm not ready." "My grandmother believes perfection is the minimum acceptable standard. By her measure, none of us are ever ready." He settled into the chair across from her, rather than behind the desk, an unusual choice that placed them on equal footing. "I believe you'll manage admirably. You have more faith than evidence warrants. I have observation." His silver-touched eyes held hers. "I've been watching your progress. Monsieur Beaumont says you have natural grace once you stop overthinking. My grandmother admits you're a quick study, which is practically a declaration of love from her. Lucienne claims you're already better at conversation than half the debutantes in the city. Carenza felt heat rise to her cheeks. They're being kind. They're being honest. Different thing entirely. He leaned back, some of the formality easing from his posture. There's something I want to give you. Before the ball. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box. Carenza's heart stuttered. Your Grace. Theron. I can't accept. You don't know what it is yet. He opened the box. Inside, nestled against white satin, lay a pendant. A single sapphire the color of midnight, surrounded by tiny diamonds, suspended from a delicate silver chain. It belonged to my mother, he said quietly. My father gave it to her on their wedding day. After she died, he kept it locked away. I only found it when we were sorting his effects. Carenza's throat tightened. I really can't. You can. You must, actually. His voice remained steady, but something deeper moved beneath the surface. At the Meridian Ball, everyone will be watching. Judging. Looking for proof that you're an imposter, a passing fancy, someone beneath my notice. This pendant tells a different story. It says you matter enough to receive a family heirloom. It says I'm not playing games. But you are playing games. We both are. Are we? The question hung between them, soft and dangerous. Carenza didn't know how to answer. It's too valuable, she managed finally. Emotionally, if not monetarily. I'm not your real betrothed. Giving me something that belonged to your mother. My mother would have liked you. He said it with quiet certainty. She was practical and brave and didn't suffer fools. She would have appreciated someone who saw poison being poured and decided kissing a stranger was preferable to watching him die. Something cracked in Carenza's carefully constructed composure. You make it sound nobler than it was. I was terrified. I didn't think. I just acted. The best decisions often happen that way. He stood, taking the pendant from its box. May I? She nodded, but not trusting her voice. He moved behind her chair, and she felt his fingers brush the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The sapphire settled against her collarbone, cool at first, then warming to her skin. There. His voice was close to her ear, barely above a murmur. Now, you look like someone who belongs at a duke's side. She turned to face him, meaning to offer thanks, or protest, or something coherent. He was closer than she expected. Close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his gaze dropped to her lips for just a moment before he stepped back. I should let you rest, he said, voice slightly rougher than before. The next few days will be demanding. Theron, he paused at the door. Why do you trust me? Really? The question had been burning in her for weeks. You barely know me. I could be anyone. I could be working with the people who tried to kill you. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice held something she hadn't heard before. Honesty stripped of polish. Because when I looked in your eyes that night, I saw fear. Not the fear of being caught or punished or exposed. The fear of losing something precious. He met her gaze across the lamplit room. You were afraid I would die. A stranger you had no reason to care about. That kind of fear can't be faked. He left before she could respond. Carenza sat alone in his study, his mother's pendant warm against her skin, and tried to remember that this was temporary. A performance. Nothing real. But her heart wasn't listening. That night, she found a book on her pillow. A collection of poetry, leather-bound, clearly well-loved. A note tucked inside, written in the Duke's cramped hand. For when the transformation feels like too much, these helped my mother remember who she was. Perhaps they'll do the same for you. She read until the candles guttered, words blurring through tears she refused to name. In 3 days, she would face society as the Dukes intended. In 3 days, everything would change again. But tonight, in the quiet of the blue suite, Carenza allowed herself one dangerous thought. What if this wasn't just a performance? What if she was starting to feel something real? She fell asleep with the poetry book clutched to her chest and the sapphire pendant lying against her heart, dreaming of winter-gray eyes and words that sounded terrifyingly like promises. The Meridian Ball blazed with 10,000 candles. Lady Castellan's estate sprawled across manicured grounds like a jewel in velvet, every window glowing, every terrace strung with lanterns that swayed in the evening breeze. Carriages lined the drive for half a mile, disgorging the finest families in the realm in a glittering parade of silk and jewels. Carenza stood at the entrance to the grand ballroom, Theron's arm beneath her gloved hand, and tried to remember how to breathe. "Steady," he murmured, pitched for her ears alone. "They're just people. Wealthy, titled, occasionally insufferable people, but people nonetheless. People who think I'm an imposter. People who are desperate to form opinions. Give them something to admire instead of something to mock." Easy for him to say. He had been born to this, or raised to command rooms simply by entering them. She had been born to clean those rooms and disappear before anyone noticed she existed. But she had his mother's sapphire at her throat, and 3 weeks of brutal training behind her. She had survived the dowager's interrogations, Monsieur Beaumont's criticism, and the endless scrutiny of a household watching for any sign of weakness. She could survive one ball. Presenting His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth, and Miss Carenza Hale. The announcement rippled through the ballroom like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turned, conversations stuttered, fans fluttered with sudden urgency. Carenza lifted her chin and descended the stairs at Theron's side, moving with the deliberate grace the dowager had drilled into her until it felt almost natural. Her gown was midnight blue silk, chosen to complement the sapphire pendant, cut in a style that whispered elegance rather than shouting wealth. She felt every eye in the room cataloging her appearance, searching for flaws, tallying evidence for the gossip that would follow. Let them look. Let them talk. She had faced the Dowager Duchess and emerged with a grudging blessing. These people were amateurs by comparison. "There you are." Lucienne materialized from the crowd in a swirl of pale gold silk, her smile bright enough to illuminate the entire ballroom. "I was beginning to worry you'd been detained. Lady Pemberton was just asking about you, Carenza. She wants to know where you acquired your pendant. I told her it was a family heirloom, which is technically true." "Lucienne," Theron said warningly. "What?" "I didn't lie. It was our family's heirloom. Oh, now it's hers." Lucienne linked her arm through Carenza's free one, effectively capturing her between siblings. "Come. There are people you absolutely must meet. Lady Iseult is fascinated by anyone who can render my brother speechless, which apparently you did quite thoroughly." They moved through the crowd, and Carenza found herself swept into a current of introductions and conversations. Lady Iseult, silver-haired and sharp-tongued, who pronounced her refreshingly unpolished. Lord Merrick, young and enthusiastic, who asked about her family with genuine curiosity rather than judgment. The Castellan daughters, twins in matching emerald, who giggled and whispered, but seemed more intrigued than hostile. Not everyone was welcoming. She caught glares from older matrons who clearly disapproved, or heard fragments of whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Saw the way certain groups closed ranks, excluding her with the subtle cruelty of those who had perfected social warfare over generations. But she also saw something else: interest, curiosity, the grudging respect that came from surviving where everyone expected her to fail. "You're doing well?" Theron said quietly during a brief moment when they stood apart from the crowd. "Better than well. You're charming them." "I'm terrifying them. There's a difference. In society, they're often the same thing." The orchestra struck up a waltz, and he offered his hand. "Shall we give them something to really talk about?" Dancing with him was different than practicing with Monsieur Beaumont. The Frenchman had been technically perfect, but clinical, on treating her like a student to be corrected rather than a partner to be led. Theron danced like he did everything else, with controlled intensity that made her feel simultaneously safe and dangerously off balance. His hand at her waist was warm through the silk. His eyes held hers with an attention that made the crowded ballroom fade to insignificance. "Everyone is watching," she murmured as they turned. "Let them. They're waiting for me to make a mistake. Then don't give them one." His grip tightened slightly. "You're not a servant pretending to be a lady, Carenza. You're a woman who saved a man's life and is now navigating the consequences with remarkable composure. Stop thinking about what you were. Think about what you're becoming." "What am I becoming?" His answer came without hesitation. Someone who could actually belong at my side." The words struck her like lightning. She stumbled slightly, recovered, but he had seen. His expression softened, warmer than she'd ever seen it. "I didn't mean to. Don't." She shook her head. "Don't apologize for honesty. I've had enough pretty lies to last a lifetime." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the dance floor, slightly breathless, while applause scattered around them. Other couples moved to take their places, but for a moment, it was just the two of them, suspended in something that felt dangerously close to real. Then Lady Ismay Thornwood appeared. She was stunning in ivory and pearls, her golden hair elaborately styled, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. Two other young women flanked her like attendants serving a queen. "Your Grace." Her curtsy was perfect, her tone honeyed with false warmth. "What a delightful surprise to see you here. And Miss Hale, of course. I barely recognized you out of your usual attire." The implication was clear. Servant's uniform, chambermaid's apron, the clothes of her true station. Carenza smiled pleasantly. "Lady Ismay, how lovely to see you again. That gown is exquisite. Wasn't it featured in last season's fashion plates? So brave of you to resurrect it." The barb landed. Lady Ismay's smile froze for just a moment before reforming into something harder. "I see country manners haven't been entirely civilized out of you yet. But then, I suppose some rough edges simply can't be polished away. Some edges are meant to cut, Lady Ismay. It's what makes them useful." Theron made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Lady Ismay's eyes flashed with genuine anger. "Enjoy your evening, Miss Hale, while you still can." She swept away, attendants following, leaving poisoned silence in her wake. "That was either very brave or very foolish," Theron observed. "Probably both. But I refuse to let her intimidate me in public. She's not wrong that she's dangerous. Neither am I." Admiration flickered across his features. Before he could respond, Lord Merrick appeared to claim a dance, and Carenza was swept back into the social whirlwind. The hours blurred together. Dancing, conversation, the endless performance of belonging. She caught glimpses of Theron across the room, always watching, always aware of where she was and who she was speaking with. The Dowager had arrived at some point and was holding court in a corner, her sharp eyes tracking everything. Near midnight, Carenza slipped away to a terrace overlooking the gardens, desperate for a moment of quiet. The cool air was a relief against her flushed skin, the darkness a welcome respite from the relentless brightness of the ballroom. She was not alone for long. "You're good at this," Lady Ismay's voice came from the shadows. "Better than I expected. Almost good enough to forget what you really are." Carenza turned slowly. Lady Ismay stood at the other end of the terrace, moonlight catching the pearls at her throat. "What I really am, Lady Ismay, is the woman who saved the Duke's life. What are you, besides disappointed?" "Disappointed?" Lady Ismay laughed, a brittle sound. "I'm furious. Do you have any idea what you've cost me? The Thornwood alliance with Ashworth has been planned for years. My entire future was built on becoming his Duchess. And you, some nobody servant, destroyed it with a single kiss. Your future was built on an arrangement he never wanted. I simply gave him an excuse to escape it. An excuse that will collapse the moment he tires of you." Lady Ismay moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost intimate. "Because he will tire of you, Miss Hale. Men like the Duke don't marry chambermaids. They amuse themselves with them, then discard them when something better comes along. Is that what you're hoping? That I'm an amusement he'll eventually abandon? I'm counting on it." Lady Ismay's smile was razor thin. "And when that day comes, I'll be here, waiting, suitable, ready to offer him the alliance his family needs and the breeding his children deserve." You speak of breeding like it's a horse trade. Marriage at our level is exactly that. Love is a luxury for peasants. We trade in power, position, legacy. Lady Ismay tilted her head. "But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You actually believe he might care for you." The word struck closer to the bone than Carenza wanted to admit. "What I believe," she said carefully, "is that the Duke makes his own choices. He chose to reject your arrangement. He chose to stand beside me tonight. If you have grievances with those choices, take them up with him." "Oh, I intend to." Lady Ismay turned toward the ballroom doors. "Enjoy your fairy tale while it lasts, Miss Hale. Midnight always comes, eventually." She vanished inside, and leaving Carenza alone with the moonlight and the unsettling echo of her words. Midnight always comes eventually. Was that what this was? A fairy tale with an expiration date? "There you are." Theron's voice made her jump. He emerged from the shadows at the far end of the terrace, concern evident in his expression. "I saw Ismay corner you. Are you all right?" "Fine. She's just angry about losing her prize. I was never her prize to win." He moved to stand beside her at the balustrade, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "What did she say to you?" "Nothing I haven't thought myself." Carenza stared out at the darkened gardens. "That this is temporary. That men like you don't marry women like me. That eventually you'll need a real alliance. And I'll be discarded. Do you believe that?" "I don't know what I believe anymore." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something she couldn't identify. "I told you before that you make me feel present." "That wasn't a lie, Carenza. Every day since you appeared in my life, something has been different. Lighter. Less like drowning and more like swimming." He turned to face her. "I didn't expect that. I'm not sure I even wanted it. Caring about things means they can be taken away. Your mother, my father. Everyone I've ever loved has eventually left." His jaw tightened. "But you're still here. Against all odds, against all logic, you're still here. And I'm starting to hope that maybe this doesn't have to be temporary." Her heart stopped, restarted, stopped again. "Theron, I'm not asking you to answer now. I'm not even sure what I'm asking. Just know that when I look at you, I don't see a chambermaid playing dress-up. I see someone extraordinary. Someone I never expected to find. Someone who makes me want to be present in my own life again." The moonlight caught the silver in his eyes, the vulnerability he so rarely allowed to surface. Before she could think, before she could calculate the consequences, Carenza closed the distance between them and kissed him. Not a performance, not a strategy, just the terrifying truth of what she felt, pressed against his lips in the darkness. He went still for a heartbeat. Then his arms came around her, pulling her closer, and he kissed her back with an intensity that stole her breath. This was different from the desperate gamble in the grand receiving hall. This was deliberate. This was real. This was two people admitting something neither had planned to feel. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, his forehead rested against hers. "That," he murmured, "was not part of our arrangement." "No," she agreed. "It wasn't." "Do you regret it?" "Not even slightly," He laughed, a genuine sound of joy that she had never heard from him before. Then I suppose we need to revise our terms. I suppose we do. They stood together in the moonlight, hearts racing, the future suddenly uncertain in an entirely new way. Inside, the ball continued, oblivious to the moment that had just changed everything. But elsewhere in the garden, hidden by shadows and hedgerows, someone else had witnessed their kiss. Someone who would use it to destroy them both. The days following the Meridian Ball existed in a strange suspension. Nothing had officially changed. Carenza still occupied the blue suite, still attended lessons with the Dowager, still played the role of the Duke's intended for whatever audience required it. But everything felt different. Theron found reasons to seek her out. Morning walks in the garden, discussing the ongoing investigation. Afternoon tea in the library, ostensibly reviewing correspondence, but actually trading stories about their vastly different childhoods. Evening conversations that stretched past propriety and into territory that made the servants exchange knowing glances. They did not kiss again. Some unspoken agreement kept them careful in public, aware that their performance had attracted enemies who would exploit any vulnerability. But the awareness was always there, in the way his hand lingered when he helped her from a carriage, in the way her breath caught when he stood too close, in the charged silences that said more than words ever could. "You're falling for him," Tansy observed one morning while arranging Carenza's hair. "Properly falling. Not just pretending." "I know. Is that wise? Probably not. But you're doing it anyway." Carenza met her friend's eyes in the mirror. When has wisdom ever stopped anyone from feeling what they feel? Tansy had no answer for that. The investigation into the assassination attempt had stalled. The footman claimed he'd been paid by a hooded figure in the market square, untraceable and anonymous. But Lord Whitaker denied any involvement and had enough powerful allies that pressing charges without proof would be political suicide. "Someone wanted me dead," Theron said grimly during one of their afternoon conversations. "And they're still out there, still waiting. Do you think they'll try again? I think they'll wait until my guard is down, until I trust the wrong person." His eyes met hers. "That's why you matter so much, Carenza. You're the one person in this household I know isn't working against me. Because I saved your life. Because you had nothing to gain and everything to lose by doing so." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "Do you understand what that means to me? In a world where everyone wants something, where every kindness has a price, you acted purely. You saw someone about to be murdered and you stopped it. Saw no calculation, no agenda, just goodness. I'm not good. I'm scared and selfish and completely out of my depth. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You can be scared and still brave, selfish and still kind, out of your depth and still swimming. Theron, I love you." The words fell between them like stones into still water. "I didn't mean to," he continued, voice rough. "I wasn't looking for this. I was looking for a strategy, a way to escape my grandmother's machinations. Instead, I found you. And somewhere between the poison and the poetry, between the lessons and the laughter, I fell in love with a chambermaid who kissed me in front of 300 people and changed everything." Carenza's heart hammered against her ribs. "You can't love me. You're a duke. And you're the woman who saved my life, the woman who stands up to my grandmother, the woman who makes me laugh and think and want things I'd convinced myself I didn't need." He stepped closer still. "Tell me you don't feel the same. Tell me honestly, and I'll never mention it again. But if you do feel it, if this is real for you too, then stop telling me what I can't do." She should pull away, should remind him of all the reasons this was impossible, should protect them both from the heartbreak that waited at the end of this path. Instead, she whispered, "I love you too." His kiss this time was different, not desperate or stolen or hidden. It was a declaration, a promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they broke apart, his eyes were brighter than she'd ever seen them. Marry me. What? Marry me. Properly. So not a performance, not an arrangement. A real marriage, built on something real. Your grandmother will learn to accept it. Society can go to hell. Theron, be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. He gripped her hands. I know there will be consequences. I know some doors will close. Some alliances will crumble. Some people will never accept you. But I would rather face all of that with you than spend the rest of my life without you. Tears blurred her vision. You're asking me to let you give up everything. I'm asking you to let me choose. To choose you. To choose happiness over expectation. His voice cracked slightly. My father chose love. My mother was worth every sacrifice he made. Why can't I do the same? She thought of the Dowager's warnings, of Lady Ismay's predictions, of all the rational reasons this should never work. Then she thought of his laugh in the moonlight, his hand offering her poetry, his eyes when he looked at her like she was something precious. Yes, she breathed. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her again, and this time it tasted like forever. Neither of them heard the footsteps retreating down the corridor. Neither of them knew that their words had been overheard. The summons came before dawn, an urgent parliamentary matter, a vote that could not proceed without the Duke's presence. Theron kissed her forehead, promised to return within 2 days, and rode for London with the taste of her still on his lips. He did not know it would be the last time he saw her at Ashworth Hall. The summons came at dawn. Carenza was woken by Tansy's pale face and trembling hands, a folded note bearing the Dowager's seal. My sitting room, immediately. Come alone. The walk to the East Tower felt endless. Every corridor seemed darker than before, every shadow threatening. By the time she reached the Dowager's apartments, her heart was pounding with dread she couldn't explain. The Dowager stood by the window, her back rigid, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles were white. She was not alone. Lady Ismay Thornwood sat in one of the high-backed chairs, her expression triumphant behind a mask of concern. Beside her stood an older man Carenza didn't recognize, portly and bearded, wearing the ceremonial robes of a high magistrate. Miss Hale. The Dowager's voice was ice. Close the door. Carenza obeyed, her mouth going dry. Do you know Lord Chief Justice Aldrich? No, aught your grace. He oversees matters of criminal deception among the nobility. The Dowager turned, and her eyes were terrible. Lady Ismay has brought certain evidence to his attention. Evidence that suggests this household has been the victim of an elaborate fraud. Carenza's stomach dropped. Your grace, I don't understand. Don't you? Lady Ismay rose, smoothing her skirts with practiced grace. Let me clarify then. I have witnesses who will testify that your rescue of the Duke was staged, that you arranged the entire poisoning attempt yourself, knowing you would be positioned to intervene and ingratiate yourself with the family. That's a lie. Is it? The footman who poured the poison has changed his testimony, for he now claims he was hired by a young woman matching your description. I never. You were a chambermaid in this household for 3 years. Lady Ismay's voice dripped with false sympathy. 3 years of invisibility, of poverty, of watching wealth you could never possess. And then suddenly, an opportunity presented itself. Fake an assassination, play the hero, marry a duke. It's almost clever, really. This is insane. Carenza turned to the Dowager desperately. Your Grace, you know this isn't true. You tested the wine yourself. I saw a servant girl kiss my grandson in front of 300 witnesses. The Dowager's voice was flat. I saw her installed in the family wing within hours. I saw my grandson, grieving and vulnerable, manipulated into an attachment that defies all reason. He wasn't manipulated. He chose Lord Aldrich. The Dowager cut her off. What are the penalties for conspiracy to commit murder against a peer of the realm? The magistrate cleared his throat. Death by hanging, Your Grace, or, in cases of noble mercy, life imprisonment in the crown's deepest cells. The world tilted sideways. You can't do this. Carence's voice came out barely above a whisper. I saved his life. I love him. Love. Lady Ismay laughed. How convenient. How perfectly calculated to deflect suspicion. She turned to the Dowager. Your Grace, I take no pleasure in this exposure. But the Thornwood family cannot stand by while a criminal plots to infiltrate the highest levels of society. For the Duke's sake, for the sake of all noble families, this woman must face justice. Carenza looked at the Dowager, searching for any sign of doubt, on any crack in the icy facade. She found none. You have 1 hour to collect your belongings, the Dowager said quietly. Lord Aldrich's men will escort you from the estate. The formal charges will be filed by end of day. Let me speak to Theron, please. He'll tell you, my grandson is in London on parliamentary business. He will be informed of these developments upon his return. The Dowager's voice softened almost imperceptibly. If you ever cared for him at all, Miss Hale, you will leave quietly. Spare him the scandal of your arrest on his own grounds. The words landed like blows. Carenza stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think. Everything she had built, everything she had dared to hope for, crumbling to ash around her. Take her, Lady Ismay said. 2 guards appeared and gripped Carenza's arms. Your Grace, please. But the Dowager had turned back to the window, and Lady Ismay was already smiling, and there was nothing left to say. They marched her through the corridor she had learned to love, past servants who stared with shock or satisfaction, down the grand staircase where she had descended on Theron's arm mere days ago. Tansy was waiting by the servants' entrance, tears streaming down her freckled face. I packed what I could, she whispered, pressing a small bag into Carenza's hands. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault. Miss Carenza, Tansy's voice cracked. What do I tell him? When he comes back? Carenza thought of Theron, of his smile in the moonlight, of his voice saying, I love you, like it was the truest thing he'd ever spoken. Tell him I didn't do this. Tell him I would never hurt him. I'd tell him. But there were no words for what she wanted to say. The guards pulled her toward a waiting carriage, and Ashworth Hall disappeared behind her, and the life she had almost lived vanished like smoke in the wind. Lady Ismay Thornwood watched from an upper window, her smile sharp with victory. The Duke would return to find his unsuitable attachment removed, his grandmother's authority restored, and a properly suitable bride waiting to comfort him in his disappointment. Everything was going according to plan. The cottage where Carenza's mother lived was smaller than she remembered. 3 days had passed since her expulsion from Ashworth Hall. 3 days of traveling in the magistrate's carriage, then being released when the formal charges collapsed. The footman had recanted before she even reached the capital, and without his testimony, Lord Aldrich had no evidence to proceed. 3 days of walking the final miles home because she had no money for coach fare. Her mother had cried when she appeared on the doorstep. Her brother Corvin had raged about justice and nobility and the cruelty of those with power. Carenza felt nothing at all. She moved through the days like a ghost, helping with chores, speaking when spoken to, sleeping in the narrow bed she'd occupied as a child. The sapphire pendant still hung around her neck. She couldn't bring herself to remove it. On the 4th day, hoofbeats thundered up the lane. Carenza was in the vegetable garden, pulling weeds with mechanical precision, when the sound made her freeze. She looked up to see a rider approaching at reckless speed, dust billowing in their wake. Theron. And he dismounted before the horse had fully stopped, striding toward her with an expression that held equal parts fury and relief. "You're here." His voice was hoarse. "Thank God you're here." Carenza stood slowly, wiping dirt from her hands. "How did you find me?" "Tansy told me where your family lived. I rode through the night." He stopped an arm's length away, drinking in the sight of her. "When I returned from London and discovered what had happened, I nearly killed my grandmother. It wasn't her fault. Lady Ismay has been dealt with." His jaw tightened. The footman recanted his new testimony when faced with actual questioning rather than bribes. The entire conspiracy collapsed within hours. Ismay has been banished from polite society, and Lord Whitaker, who was funding her schemes, is facing formal investigation. Carenza's knees threatened to buckle. "What?" "It was Whitaker all along. He funded the assassination attempt through intermediaries, then funded Ismay's plot to frame you when the first plan failed. He thought that if he could discredit you, I would be vulnerable enough to manipulate." Theron's expression darkened. He underestimated how thoroughly I would pursue anyone who tried to take you from me. "But your grandmother said." "My grandmother was deceived, expertly, deliberately deceived by people who knew exactly which fears to exploit." He moved closer. "She feels tremendous guilt, for whatever that's worth. She asked me to convey her apologies, and her grudging respect for how you conducted yourself under pressure." "Grudging respect?" Carenza laughed weakly. "How generous. That's practically a declaration of love from her." His hand reached out, hesitated, then cupped her dirt-smudged cheek. "Carenza, come back with me." "To what? To more scheming and suspicion? To a life where I'll always be the chambermaid who got above her station? To a life where you'll be my wife?" His voice cracked. "I meant what I said before they took you. I want to marry you, properly, publicly, permanently. The scandal, there's already scandal. There will always be scandal. But I would rather weather every storm with you than spend my life in comfortable safety without you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "My father's letter to me said love was the only thing that made duty bearable. I finally understand what he meant." "What letter?" "I found it after you left, hidden in his study. Not meant to be discovered after his death." Theron's eyes glistened. "He wrote about my mother, about choosing her despite everyone's objections, about how the pain of losing her was worth every moment of having her." He pressed his forehead to hers. "He told me to be brave, to find someone who made me brave, and hold on to them with everything I have." Tears spilled down Carenza's cheeks. "Theron, you make me brave, Carenza. You make me want to stop existing and start actually living. You make me believe that love isn't a weakness to be avoided, but a strength to be embraced." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes. "Please, come home. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're not a scandal, or a liability, or a mistake. Let me show the world what I see when I look at you." "What do you see?" "Everything." His voice was barely a whisper. "I see everything." From the cottage doorway, Carenza's mother watched in silence. Her brother Corvin stood beside her, his earlier anger transformed into something like wonder. Carenza looked at the man who had changed her life, the Duke who saw a chambermaid, and chose her anyway, the grieving son who had learned to live again. "Yes," she said. "Take me home." He kissed her there in the vegetable garden, surrounded by weeds and witnesses, and this time there was nothing desperate or uncertain about it. This time it felt like coming home. The dowager waited for them in her sitting room. She looked older than Carenza remembered, smaller. The imperious authority that had made her seem invincible was diminished somehow and replaced by something more human. Guilt, Carenza realized. The dowager felt guilty. "Miss Hale." The older woman rose as they entered, moving with less grace than usual. "I owe you an apology." "Yes," Carenza said simply. "You do." The dowager flinched almost imperceptibly. Lady Ismay presented evidence that seemed compelling. The footman's changed testimony, witnesses who claimed to have seen you meeting with suspicious figures. documents that appeared to link you to Lord Whitaker's faction. She paused. I should have questioned more thoroughly. I should have trusted my grandson's judgment. Instead, I allowed my fears to override my reason. Your fears? That Theron would make the same choice his father made. The Dowager's voice softened. Edmund loved Charlotte beyond all sense. When she died, it destroyed him. I watched my son fade away over 5 years, eating and breathing, but not truly living. Her eyes met Carence's. I didn't want that for my grandson. I thought if I could control his marriage, ensure he chose duty over passion, he might be spared that devastation. So you tried to remove me. I tried to protect him, in the worst possible way. The Dowager moved to her chair, lowering herself with careful dignity. I was wrong, Miss Hale. About you, about this match, about what my grandson needs. I've spent so many years managing this family that I forgot how to trust them. Theron stepped forward, his hand finding Carence's. Grandmother, I've chosen. No manipulation, no coercion. I love this woman, and I intend to marry her regardless of consequences. I know. The Dowager's lips quirked in something almost like a smile. You're as stubborn as your father was, as stubborn as I was once. She turned to Carence. You faced false accusations with composure. You protected my grandson's dignity, even while being dragged from this house in disgrace. You could have raged, could have demanded public vindication, could have made this family's failure everyone's entertainment. Instead, you went quietly. Why? Because a scene would have hurt him more than it hurt me. The Dowager studied her for a long moment. Charlotte would have said the same thing. Silence fell between them, weighted with history and grief and the fragile possibility of something new. I'm not asking for your blessing, Carence said finally, but I am telling you what will happen. I'm going to marry your grandson. I'm going to love him as well as I'm able. And I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure he never fades away the way his father did. How? By being present, by making him laugh, by reminding him that life is worth living even when it's painful. She squeezed Theron's hand. By refusing to let him retreat into duty and distance when the world becomes too much. The Dowager rose again, crossing the room with measured steps until she stood directly before Carence. For a moment, she simply looked, searching for something only she could name. Then she took Carence's free hand in both of hers. My daughter-in-law was my closest friend, she said quietly. I never told Edmund that. Never told anyone. Losing her broke something in me, too, and I've spent 20 years pretending otherwise. Her grip tightened. If you can do for Theron what you've promised, if you can help him live fully instead of merely existing, then you will have my gratitude, not just my acceptance. My gratitude. Carence's throat tightened. Your Grace, Adelaide. The Dowager's eyes glistened. My name is Adelaide, and if you're going to be my granddaughter, you might as well use it. The embrace that followed was stiff, unpracticed, thoroughly awkward. It was also, in its way, perfect. Lucienne burst through the door seconds later, having clearly been eavesdropping in the corridor. Does this mean we can finally plan the wedding? Because I have so many ideas, and Monsieur Beaumont has already composed a special waltz, and the modiste needs at least 3 weeks for the gown. Lucienne, Theron and the Dowager said simultaneously. What? Someone has to be practical about these things. Carence laughed, and surprising herself with the sound. Maybe, just maybe, this was going to work. The wedding of Theron Vale, Duke of Ashworth, to Carence Hale, was the most talked about event of the decade. The cathedral was filled beyond capacity. Noble families who had whispered about the chambermaid's presumption now jockeyed for prominent seats, eager to witness history. Those who had mocked her transformation watched in reluctant admiration as she walked down the aisle in a gown of cream silk and seed pearls, the sapphire pendant glowing at her throat. Carenza saw none of them. She saw only Theron, waiting at the altar, his eyes bright with emotion he no longer tried to hide. She saw Lucienne, resplendent as maid of honor, barely containing her tears. She saw Adelaide in the front row, her expression complicated, but undeniably proud. And beside Adelaide, in a place of honor, sat Carenza's mother. Her simple dress was outdone by every gown in the cathedral, but her smile outshone them all. The ceremony was traditional, the vows timeless. But when Theron spoke his promises, his voice cracked with genuine feeling that made several hardened matrons reach for handkerchiefs. "I vow to see you," he said, departing from the prescribed words. "Not as a servant or a scandal or a surprise, but as the woman you are. Brave, brilliant, entirely unexpected. I vow to be present in our life together, to laugh more than I brood, to choose you every day for the rest of my days." Carenza's response was equally unscripted. "I vow to remind you that love is not a weakness, that choosing happiness requires courage, that the best things in life often begin with accidents." She smiled through tears. "I vow to keep you present, keep you laughing, and keep falling asleep on your shoulder whenever the moment feels right." Laughter rippled through the cathedral. Those who knew the story of how they'd met exchanged knowing glances. The kiss that sealed their marriage was neither brief nor proper. It was passionate enough to make the bishop cough disapprovingly, and real enough to make their authenticity undeniable. The Duke of Ashworth had married his chambermaid, and the entire court, whether they approved or not, had to admit they'd never seen him happier. The reception at Ashworth Hall lasted until dawn. Carenza danced until her feet ached, ate until she couldn't manage another bite, and accepted congratulations from people who had once looked through her like glass. Some of them were genuine, others were not. She found she didn't much care about the difference. Near midnight, Theron pulled her away from the crowd onto a familiar terrace. "Escaping your own wedding?" she teased. "Stealing a moment with my wife." He pulled her close. "That's a word I'm going to enjoy using. Wife. My wife? Have I mentioned my wife?" "Once or twice." "Not nearly enough, then." He kissed her softly. "Are you happy?" Terrified, overwhelmed, completely certain this is a dream I'll wake from any moment. And beneath all that, she smiled. Happy. Impossibly, ridiculously happy. "Good." He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small book. "I have a wedding gift for you." It was the poetry collection he'd given her months ago, but when she opened it, she found new inscriptions throughout. Notes in his handwriting, marking his favorite passages, explaining why each one mattered. On the final page, he'd written, "You saved my life the night we met. But the truth is, you've been saving it every day since. Thank you for making me brave enough to choose. Thank you for choosing me in return. Thank you for being the unexpected beginning to everything I never knew I wanted. Yours, in all ways and always." Theron Carenza's vision blurred with tears. "I love you." "I know." His smile was soft. "I love you too. And I plan to keep saying it until you're thoroughly sick of hearing it." "I'll never be sick of hearing it." "Good, because forever is a long time." They stood together on the terrace, enwrapped in moonlight and music and the certainty that some accidents lead exactly where they're meant to. 1 year later, the opera house glittered with familiar grandeur as Carenza took her seat in the Duke's private box. She was not the same woman who had once scrubbed floors in the servants' quarters. The Duchess of Ashworth wore sapphires that had belonged to her husband's mother, moved with the grace the dowager had drilled into her, and commanded respect from people who had once overlooked her entirely. But she was still Carenza, still the girl who acted on instinct, who spoke her mind, who refused to be diminished by expectations or propriety. "You look magnificent," Theron murmured, settling beside her. "You're biased." "Thoroughly and permanently biased." He lifted her hand to his lips. Sure, any regrets? She thought about the past year, the challenges she'd faced winning over skeptical society, the quiet victories of earning respect rather than simply demanding it, the moments of doubt that Theron's steady presence always dispelled, the nursery being prepared in the East Wing, not yet announced, but already the source of secret smiles between them. Not a single one. The orchestra began to play, and Carenza leaned against her husband's shoulder as the music swelled around them. "If I fall asleep," she whispered, "don't wake me." "Never." His arm came around her. "I'll be here when you open your eyes." It had begun with an accident, a desperate kiss, a shattered wine glass, a court falling silent in shock. Now it was something else entirely. A life, a love, a story that people would tell for generations. And the maid who kissed the Duke who chose her anyway, and the happily ever after that neither of them had expected to find. The whispers about their marriage never fully stopped. Society remained divided on whether the match was romantic or ridiculous. Adelaide continued to make pointed comments about proper behavior, though she also ensured that anyone who openly insulted Carenza found themselves mysteriously excluded from every event that mattered. Tansy became the Duchess's personal attendant, rising to a position of trust and comfort that her years of loyal service had earned. Lucienne married a viscount who appreciated her energy and never once tried to calm her down. And every year, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Theron and Carenza attended the opera together. She always pretended to fall asleep on his shoulder. Well, he always pretended not to notice. It was their tradition, their reminder, their proof that sometimes the most extraordinary lives begin with a single, impossible moment.